was too self-confident and to say, okay, if I put my authority behind it, then it will work. But he miscalculated the public opinion. It's risky. There was no need to link this to his resignation.
So hello there. Good afternoon. If I ask you to take your seat, we're going to begin with some little delay, so we apologize for that, since we are finishing the last workshop. So good afternoon to you all. It's a pleasure to host this discussion in this afternoon. My name is Carlos Afonso. I am director from the Institute for Technology and Society of Rio de Janeiro, and we are gladly putting up this discussion today, which is called Internet Bill of Rights Enforcement and Impact, which is a follow-up to a discussion that has begun in the last IGF, when we managed to get on the same table some comparisons between the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights, which is a federal law that has been approved in 2014. For those of you who have been attending IGFs for a long time, you might be familiar with the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights initiative, and the Italian Declaration on Internet Rights that has been approved last year. And the idea for this discussion is to not only to compare the experiences between the two tests, but especially to understand the challenges regarding the interpretation, the enforcement of those so-called Internet Bill of Rights. The idea of Internet Bill of Rights is it's a somewhat old idea since the very early beginning of the IGF, with a dynamic coalition that used to be called like that, Internet Bill of Rights. And it is really interesting to see how this idea of coming up with an Internet Bill of Rights has prospered in the last decade. So we are taking the time on this event today to discuss those two initiatives and to understand a little bit more what are the challenges once they are approved and how they can be applied, how they can be enforced. So for that, we have two speakers to join our conversation today. And let me just remind you right from the start that it is an actual conversation. So feel free to jump in. We are just going to have two interventions from Stefano Trumpi from ISOC Italy and from Flavia Lefebvre from the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee, CGI-BR. And right after that, we will open up for discussions, debate around those two initiatives. We really want to keep it as informative as possible, so let's have it as an actual conversation between ourselves and take the most of our time. Well, without much further delongings, I would like to pass the mic to Stefano Trumpi to begin with. So, Stefano, the floor is yours. Let me see if I can handle this to you.
Thank you. Good evening to everybody. And Stefano, my name is Stefano, pronounced in Italian Trumpi. And don't confuse with the Trumpy. So I tell you briefly the history, and then it is better to wait for questions rather than making a long presentation. So first of all, let me say that the Italian government and Internet Society Italy we were among the founders of the Internet Bill of Rights Dynamic Coalition that was started in Athens in 2006. And then we had even a joint declaration of the Brazilian government with the Italian government at the 2007 meeting in Rio de Janeiro. Then we had a pause, because change of government and so on, and they were not so keen of insisting on these problems. But the attention has been continuing, and Professor Rodotà, that has been our leader and is to get, also now, but he could not go here. Then in 2014, in July, the Chamber of Deputies of Italian government then set up a group of a commission to elaborate a declaration on internet rights. And this was important because this group is a parliamentarian group and has a special status, let's say, also considering that declarations on internet rights, we count that in different organizations there are at least 50 or 60 very well-known declarations by different bodies. And 1 year later, so in July 2015, last year, we delivered the declaration that was then known also outside of Italy. And we had a joint declaration together with France. And then we made last year a presentation, day 0, of the IGF in João Pessoa in Brazil. And then after this, the parliament also approved with a global majority a decree where they asked the government both to do and to apply this inside the Italian system, but not only that, also to promote other parliaments, other official sites to collaborate and to go ahead with that. And recently, concerning the part that is regarding the Italian side, there was a joint agreement with the Ministry of Education to, first of all, spread not only our declaration, but also a book that has been written in order to be more didactic, let's say, to explain all the 14 clauses of this declaration. And because we think that the question of education for the young people is so important, because then it is the way to let all the young generations to understand and to be active in order to try to push for the, let's say, approval from one side, but also suggest solutions for the problem that we have. One of the initiatives that was important in this last month is the so-called cyberbullying. That is something that in Italy is very well understood and also is a problem. While on the international side, not so much happened in this year, also because we had a lot of priorities in the parliament that you might have known concerning Italy, and from this week we have no government and we will have a new government. But in any case, we think that this action and this promotion is very important, because we have to involve all the side of the society. Okay, I finish here for the moment.
Thank you, Stefano. And one thing that is really interesting, in order to just serve as an initial comparison between the two texts, is that Brazil has approved a hard law, a federal law, and and the Italian opted for a more soft law, such to say, approach. But it's really interesting that Stefano is mentioning the fact that this joint agreement with the Ministry of Education, because it links the idea of the text with the digital education and how to get kids and teenagers aware of their rights online, and of course that links to the cyberbullying and other issues. So with that, I'll pass the mic to Flávia Lefebvre from the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee.
Good afternoon for everyone. Thank you for Carlos Afonso for the invite. And I'm from Proteste. It's a consumers association that has 2,030 members in all country. And I'm also one of 4 representatives in Internet Steering Committee of the civil society. And I'm very pleased to be here and to be able to join you to talk about the important building process of Marco Civil da Internet, and also about the current and critical political scenario in Brazil, and the implications on the application and interpretation of the law in Brazil. The Marco Civil da Internet is a result of a utopian process, a broadly and democratic participatory process that had as a main objective to ensure that the Internet regulation would not be based on a criminalization bias. The law focused on the democratization of Internet access, universalization, net neutrality, freedom of expression, protection of personal data and privacy. And this process was based on the Decalogue principles enacted by CGI-BR in 2009 in a context of multi-stakeholder governance. After the law approval in 2014, with commemoration especially of civil society, we went to the second stage of the confrontation with the interests of large private economic international groups, with police and criminal investigation authorities, and with conservative and authoritarian political forces, in view the edition of the decree that regulated the Marco Civil da Internet, enacted in June in this year, Decree 8.771, which reaffirmed and made clear the rights established in the law. Today, we have more than 200 draft bills proposing to change the Marco Civil da Internet in order to weaken fundamental principles and rights such as net neutrality, non-liability for Internet providers, personal data protection, and privacy. And behind these proposed amendments to the law, we have the heavy lobby of the copyright industry. We have also seen judicial decisions that determine applications block, like WhatsApp, for example, when the company refuses to provide data and content about investigated persons by the police or investigation authorities, justifying the refusal in technical impossibility because of the cryptography use. On this issue, the Brazilian Supreme Court will decide in various lawsuits challenging the constitutionality of such judicial decisions. It is important to highlight that the decree established a system of control and oversight over the rights and obligations of the Marco Civil da Internet, involving public agents like Anatel, telecommunication agents, consumer protection, and competition protection, which should be guided by guidelines set by CGI-BR. Despite the mandate and the central role that CGIBR has after Marco Civil and after the decree, we are still discussing the decision-making process to build consensus on sensitive and conflicting issues such as zero rating, data cap, and internet.org. There are different interests in conflicts. As a consumer representative, I don't believe that could be possible to reach a consensus on those issues with the telcos and internet providers. That's why I'm arguing that CGIBR need to address the lack of reasonable decision-making process when we don't have consensus. Due to this difficulty, now CGIBR is working to define a decision framework with rules that guide the cases when we don't have consensus and that decisions take place by majority as a way to make achievable the multi-stakeholder governance as established Marco Civil da Internet. On the other hand, non-governmental associations and activists join forces to make reaction against the attacks mentioned on the Coalition Rights Network. Dozens of consumers, freedom of expression and communication democratization organization will be severely affected by the setbacks that abuse represent. Then they are preparing and publishing papers and working with the National Congress to avoid the loss of important achievements that came with the Marco Civil da Internet. Therefore, editing a law is just the first step towards to conquest rights. The second stage is disputes over the applications and interpretation of the law in the courts and in the reaction against changes in the National Congress facing the economic power of large multinational companies. Thank you.
Before I open up for questions and comments, just two very brief comments on the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights, or so-called Marco Civil da Internet, in addition to the comments that Flavia made. I totally agree that the idea of that the work is far from done. So the approval of the law was a first phase, and the second one is proving to be even more challenging than the first one. And one of the reasons that motivated us to have this event in this IGF is because in the last year, the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights ended up being featured in the news because of the blockings of WhatsApp in Brazil. We had 4 blockings that were ordered by a specific judicial decision, and some of them end up quoting or referring to the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights as the source or the reasoning for the blocking to take place. And of course, this ended up putting not only Brazil, but the Brazil Internet Bill of Rights in a very bad light, because it looks like this one law that was supposed to protect liberties was, by the end of the day, being used to block this one application, and of course, putting Brazil together with some other countries that has the blocking of internet applications as a habit, which is definitely not the case of Brazil. So one quick mention of the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights that I would like to make is that a couple of decisions that end up quoting the Marco Civil in order to order this blocking had ended up interpreting and ended up applying one provision of the Marco Civil, which is Article 12, that it has a provision that says that applications may suffer some sanctions, such as a warning of some sort, suspension of services, and even prohibition of some services, but not the entire services of this one app or this one platform. The suspension and the prohibition that you might find in Article 12 of the Marco Civil are the suspension and prohibition of the activities mentioned in Article 11. I know that might sound a little bit abstract because I'm talking about articles and you don't have the wording in front of you, but it's just to make the point clear that when the Marco Civil mentions suspension and prohibition of the activities of the Article 11 of the Marco Civil, Article 11 deals with the activities of collection and treatment of personal data. So, by the end of the day, when Article 12 says that application providers might suffer sanctions and severe sanctions, such as the suspension and the prohibition of the activities of Article 11, it's not the suspension or the prohibition of the entire platform or the entire application, just the activities related to the collection and treatment of private data. This is just one clarification that I think it's important to mention. And it was really interesting that we had, in the last blocking order that we had in Brazil, the justice from the Brazilian Supreme Court ended up reversing the judicial order for the blocking, stating that the Marco Civil, the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights, would be the reason alone for the blocking not to occur, for the blocking not to happen. So in this last blocking situation that we had in Brazil, the Marco Civil ended up serving as the reason for the blocking in the first place, and then in an injunction issued by the Supreme Court, the Marco Civil was the reason for the blocking to be relieved, to be terminated. So I believe it's very important to highlight that, because I believe some of you, especially those of you who are not Brazilian, have read in the press, in the news, about the blockings of WhatsApp in Brazil, and this is just one quick comment. I could go over on some other issues, but I'll save that for... Go ahead. So, Stefano.
Okay. I would like to add something about our relations with friends Brazilian. Actually, the Italian government, the Italian parliament avoided, just as a first step, let's say, to enter into specific provisions, into a law comparable to Marco Civil. And you also have been present in Rome, invited by the parliament, just to explain Marco Civil, that has been, let's say, an exploitation of the 12 principles that you had approved, like very, very short principles, but that they have to be carved in the stone, like i 12 comandamenti. While in Italy we did just to start something a little bit intermediate, in the sense that the 14 points that we established have also some comments and also left a few points outside, like the intellectual property, because just to mention a theme that is important in the internet, but is hard to simplify in a short description. So we made something intermediate, more close to the 12 principles, rather than establishing a law, that hard law that is explaining all the possible solutions and so on. Also, we have to consider that in Europe we have a lot of legal establishment by the Council of Europe or by the European Union, yeah. So also, just to mention a couple of arguments that could be then exploited a little bit, is the right to be forgotten on one side, And another point that we put as a 14th principle has been the initiative to establish in Italy a multi-stakeholder committee to run the internet in Italy that is close to what you did with the CGI in Brazil. So, and this explains the vicinities of our intent, at least. Okay.
Thanks for that, Stefano. I think it's time for us to open up for comments and questions.
So my name is Christian Ossepier. I am working for the moment with the association China-EU. And what we want is to learn from each other's on experience on digital regulation and approaches and policies. But my question is more related to Brazil, in the sense that I'm wondering, but maybe you will correct me, whether this Marco Civil is not a legislation by the rich for the rich. Because at the end, what people are caring, and certainly the poorer part of the population, is to have access to the internet. So you may increase the obligations and make it less attractive to invest in the internet. For example, if a company wants to get data, big data, I mean, they could sponsor free access to the internet. But then there are lots of legislation on data privacy, on what you can do with data. So why would you invest? So the question is, don't we have to choose between internet for all or very secure internet for the rich? And on which side are you?
Okay. So very quickly, the idea of the Marco Civil, it's idea to put up some provisions on how fundamental rights could be applied to the internet. And of course, the Marco Civil has a very strong language about digital inclusion, but the law itself would not magically get people online and included. So I think it's important to explain here, and thanks for your question, because it gives us the opportunity to make it clear that a regulation, a law, will never solve all the problems. It has, by the end of the day, this aim of trying to solve some of the disputes that we might have concerning issues such as privacy, net neutrality, or liability of intermediaries, but it will not make people in poor areas of Brazil connected just because we have this one legislation. So that's why it's important to have the government aware that the mission is far from done simply because you have a federal law saying that to have access to the internet is a fundamental right. It's there in the wording of the Marco Civil, including saying something about that if you do not have free speech and privacy, you don't have a full access to the internet. And so you have very, very strong language on digital inclusion. But of course, the law will not solve this problem. And it's important for the government to have policies that deals with digital inclusion, especially in Brazil, which is a country in which almost like half of the population is not in the internet. So we need to take extra care of those. It's half part of the Brazil. So Flavia.
I will try explain, but Marco Civil da Internet introduce clearly the universalization principle and the obligation of the public, the government, to adopt public policies to guarantee the right of digital inclusion. And I agree with Carlos Afonso. You can't have internet if you don't have freedom of expression, net neutrality, universalization. Without these two principles, for example, I don't know if we can talk in internet properly.
Mario, you want to jump in?
Now, just a quick comment on the data privacy and data protection issue. Well, in Brazil, there is no data protection law, although in the Marco Civil there are some privacy and data protection provisions. But we've been discussing, well, a data protection bill, a draft bill, and then a data protection bill since last year. There are two bills pending in the parliament. And I have to say that the feedback from the companies that they are supporting these bills, and they are supporting regulation on that area because they need more, let's say, legal certainty in certain areas. So sometimes regulation is not a good thing, but in some specific areas where you have most of the time different laws in different places and you have to comply with different rules, it's easier for those companies to follow clear legal standards and clear legal rules, apply clear legal requirements. And that's the case we are facing now in Brazil. I think the bills pending in the parliament, they're getting the support from the telco industry, from the IT industry, and so on. So all the big players, including Google, Facebook, Microsoft, they're supporting the idea of having a data protection law regulating not only the internet, because the Marco Civil, since it was supposed to be part of, let's say, a package of different laws, so the law regulating the use of the web, and another data protection law, so applying to different, covering all the areas, but the law didn't come at that time, so they had to include in the parliament some provisions in the Marco Civil, but sometimes they conflict with other rules and they make some processing of data difficult because the Marco Civil requires the consent of the data subject in any processing of data in the web. So it creates a bit of legal uncertainty in some areas, and that's why companies, they are promoting the idea of having a more horizontal data protection law covering all issues, and more, of course, that's the approach we had there, more inspired by the European data protection law and now the data protection regulation, which we enter into force in next year. So I think the answer to your question, to be more, let's say, direct to the point, straight to the point, is that companies, they are looking for legislation now in our case because they need more legal certainty. Because Brazilian courts, they are known by, let's say, being quite activist. So if you don't have a legal provision stating clearly what has to be applied in the specific case, probably there will be many different decisions applying rules in a completely different way in many parts of the ground. So having a law will create more certainty for the companies.
No, it's only on Article 7 what I was referring to. I mean, because there is the debate on opt-in and opt-out. And what I understand is the Brazilian Marco Civil is the opt-in, whereas I think industry usually proposes the opt-out. And that's why my question was, is that not at the expense of the more poor population who wouldn't care and would accept to be in, whereas now they have first to accept? Okay.
Yeah, that's why the bill in the parliament, it's supposed to deal with this issue. So in terms of sensitive data, there will be an opt-in approach, but then for the data we follow, let's say, the non-express consent. So it's not so clear if there will be an opt-out or if it will be also an opt-in, but maybe, but maybe with a more, let's say, flexible approach, so allowing, for example, to just opt-in, clicking like a privacy policy or something like that. But from now, at this moment, I would say that's not. It has to be really clear and opt-in, but really stating that you allow the processing of your data.
And we have in Brazil the law of consumer protection, strong law, and this law, according Marco Civil, have to be interpreted junto, né? Together to Marco Civil da Internet, and according the law of consumer protection, the opt-out is right clear.
Good. And a quick follow-up on the scenario, just to understand, because you're focusing on Article 7. Article 7 was an article that was changed right after the Snowden revelations. And I think it's important to put this political scenario on like why the article looks like the way it does. Because right after the Snowden revelations, the Brazilian government decided to have the Marco Civil as one of the responses to the spy scandals. And because of that, the provisions on privacy and data protection, they became stronger in the Marco Civil. But then again, the Marco Civil is not a general data protection law. So you end up having this one result, which is you have some very strong language in issues such as the consent, which is the opt-in, opt-out debate, but you don't have the exceptions that you would expect in a general data protection law. So this is one of the points in which there is criticism on the text of on the wording of the Marco Civil, and that's where the draft or the bills of law on data protection that are being discussed right now in the National Congress play in, because they will end up amending or changing the wording of the Marco Civil in the end of the day.
But excuse me, if it's possible, I have another question, always from China EU. Luigi Gambardella, my name. And the question is this, but for example, on data protection, now you know Europe, yes, Europe is introducing a new legislation. What Brazil will do, you will change again the legislation to follow the new European legislation? And then I have another more fundamental question to both our Brazilian friend and to my Italian friend. When the debate on net neutrality started was under Obama administration. And many countries had followed US discussion, and so has been reflected also in Brazil. But now that we have a Trump, not Trumpy administration, Trump administration, maybe we don't know what will happen. US could change completely their policy on net neutrality. What Brazil and Europe and Italy will do, you think it will be an impact?
May I answer? Thank you, Luigi. We have to take to consider this fact. Internet is transnational by nature. So it is always important to see what happens outside of the country, of course. And then our role normally is synthesized in this sentence, think globally, act locally. So then if something happens that modifies some of the realm of the internet concerning privacy, concerning anti-terrorism and things like that, cyberbullying and so on, then could imply that when trying to regulate in a way or another in the country, because Marco Civil has been developed for Brazil, and as I said, and is not something that should be applied in all the countries. In Italy, we didn't. Let me finish. We didn't start such a legislative activity, let's say. But in order to progress, since the Commission is still in operation, then we asked the Commission and the Chamber of Deputies, please, when there are some facts that bring you to want to decide something, some decree, some law, or something like that, please involve us, because we have the knowledge of the whole internet and of the problems around. And then we can try to apply something that is valid for Italy.
Hence, the Italian model is very different from the Brazilian, because we are not a new law, but it's just some principle. And because there is a risk in internet, if you do a law, then because of the changes, because of the technology, then you need to legislate again.
But sentence, and then we want to activate other comments. But in Italy, we have a European Union. And then we have to, in some way, obliged to follow and to try to confront different ideas of countries inside the European Union. And then we have a coverage also of legal activities concerning the internet, and where we have to confront and to do something specifically for our country.
As you see, we're having a hard time to turn on the mic, but very, very quickly, just to address your question. The Marco Civil is a federal law, but is a principles-based law. So it tries to be as abstract and focused more on principles rather than going into details on one specific technology, because that would end up for the law to be amended or changed very quickly. Even by following a principles-based approach, of course, nothing stops one parliamentary, one congressman or woman to propose, to suggest amendments to the law. And I believe that's the most challenging part of the approach that the Brazilian has followed, which is we have a law that is directly applied by judges. So once it's approved, a judge can use the Marco Civil and enforce it right from the beginning. And right now we are seeing the Marco Civil being applied by superior courts, which is part of the growing of the law itself. But of course, it can change, and most of the I believe the challenging activity of us who have been involved with the law since the beginning is to avoid that the law is changed for the worse and make sure that the law is preserved and what it has of good progress to way in which some of the topics are discussed. And you mentioned Trump and Europe and how Brazil faces this whole discussion. Of course, I don't want to go in futurology here and what's going to happen in the near future. But I think it's important to mention that as a country located in the so-called global south, it's interesting to see how movements in policy and regulation in the US, in Europe, might serve as an inspiration for what happens down there in Brazil. And just to give you an example, I was speaking about the right to be forgotten earlier on today, and it's really striking to see that after May 2014, only in the Court of Appeals of the state of São Paulo, you have 46 decisions on the right to be forgotten and the internet that end up referring to the decision that was made in Europe in the Costerra case, or tries to mimic some of the arguments and reasoning that you have in the European decision. So this just serves as a very practical example that influence and inspiration might happen. And of course, we don't know what's going to come up with the Trump administration, even though I would say if I had to choose, I would love to stick with a Trump administration any single day. But then again, let's go back to you. Any further comments, remarks, questions to our panelists? If not, I will follow to one second topic that I think it's important for us to address, which is the way in which the intermediary liability provisions are portrayed or presented in the two texts. And one thing that I would like just to mention to you all is that one of the areas in which the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights has been applied the most is the issue of internet intermediaries liability. So is like Google, Facebook, or your favorite intermediary responsible or liable for the content that is posted by one of its users? And before the Marco Civil, Brazil has established a very strong case law on a notice and take down regime that would turn the providers, the application providers, liable for the content of its users if it receives a notification, can be even like a private notification, and it end up not doing anything or not removing the content. So one social network provider, for example, could be held liable for a content posted by its user if it receives a notification by a private party saying, hey, this content is illegal or it's causing me damage, and it fails to remove this one content following a notice and take down regime that is more, I would say, close to the regime that you have in the US on the DMCA for copyright materials. The Marco Civil changed the way in which this system works, and if you take a look in the booklet that we have distributed, in Article 19 of the Marco Civil, you have a provision that says that an application provider could only be held liable if it fails to comply with a judicial order that, of course, commands this one content to be taken down, to be stricken down. And this is quite interesting because that created, first of all, some people reading this provision got the idea that one specific content could only be removed from the Brazilian internet with a judicial order, which is not quite the case. If you look at the wording of Article 19, it says that the provider could only be held liable if it fails to comply with a judicial order. But there is nowhere in this provision that says that only a judicial order could be like the condition for some photo or video to be removed from the Brazilian internet. But this provision is quite important because not only it changed the way in which the notice and takedown system has been applied in Brazil, and right now we are seeing some cases that are reaching the higher courts of Brazil, and this provision is being applied, including the Superior Court of Justice in Brazil, in Brasília, applying this Article 19 of the Marco Civil. But I think it's important to mention because there are two exceptions to this rule of Article 19. One is content related to intimate content and revenge porn or other materials that expose the intimacy of a person, including adult material. That's Article 21. And you have one second exception, which is copyright, because there is an ongoing copyright reform in our legislation in Brazil, and the Internet Bill of Rights differ to the reform of the copyright law, the solution to the issue of copyright violation on the internet. But I understand that this is important to mention because it means that the general rule for intermediary liability in the Brazilian internet is the intermediary is not to be held liable for the content posted by its user, except from the moment in which there is a judicial order requesting commanding this content to be taken down. But there is this exception to issues of adult material involving nudity, sex tapes, and such. And this is important because it connects to the whole discussion about cyberbullying in Italy as well. And as I understand, it's one of the biggest discussions that you're having in Italy right now. So. Yeah. If you want to make a quick comment on how the situation stands nowadays in Italy, it would be great, Stefano. Oh, and you can use this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. For this aspect of cyberbullying, there is a proposal of law that is not yet approved, but it is contested by the community because this could introduce some to change data or some infringement of freedom of expression, let's say, because maybe the law has not been so well articulated, and this is the reason why part of also the parliamentarians now have some problem because they see negative effects in the end. Because apparently anyone that is indicating some cases that a single person ask for cancelling certain information or things like that without any support of any legal, let's say, sentence. And this is one of the problems that is not only in this case, because we have similar problems also for questions regarding intellectual property rights. And the fact, and also we have some contestation of the regulator in Italy that is able to ask to cancel data, while the legal people, they say that for any provision to cancel data should be approved with a legal sentence. But this is just to understand for you the fact that maybe there are so many cases that the justice, let's say, could be overwhelmed by a number of cases that should be avoided. So this is one of the problems that we face in defending internet rights. And so I think that I would like to say, just because it's about the same problem, is concerning the right to be forgotten, that we discussed a lot about that. And the point is that the case was activated by a case with Google, and this case of the Spanish user. And then the real problem is that the cancelling of this link to certain information is something that is decided by the company, by Google. And there is not a way, a simple way, how to contest from the legal point of view something that Google made either in positive case, cancelling certain information, or refusing to cancel. So, and so this lets you understand the fact that even to defend rights, then there are so many problems that bring to the legitimation, let's say, even of the internet. Just I exaggerating a little bit, but then we started to discuss. We can cancel the data for the right to be forgotten only referring to search engine Google, and what about the others? And what about information that is registered not in Europe but in the United States or in Brazil? So there are a lot of contrasting points that demonstrate that it's really difficult to make some rights that are equally defended in all the states, considering that internet is a transnational organization. Okay.
No, I just want to comment. I agree with you, because I think what you were saying, we need transnational agreement, because the point is, if each country does its own law, then we'll have a different treatment and different rights.
And if I may jump in the discussion of the right to be forgotten, just to be as informative as possible for the audience, the right to be forgotten is Article 11 of the Italian Declaration of Internet Rights. And the Article 11 of the Italian Declaration, Item 2, reads like this. The right to be forgotten cannot restrict the freedom of search and the right of the public to be informed, which are necessary conditions for the functioning of a democratic society. This right may be exercised by public figures or those who hold public functions only if the data concerning them are irrelevant with regard to their activities or the public functions they perform. And I think this is a very interesting point to make about the Italian Declaration and comparing to the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights, because we do not have right to be forgotten provision in our law. As mentioned, we do have some bills of law that are trying to amend the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights to have a language on the right to be forgotten. And one typical discussion that is happening mostly in Europe about the removal, not only in one country, but globally. I believe most of you are aware of the discussion about the so-called global removals, in which the French regulator is pushing for a removal that happens not only in France and not even in the European Union, but globally. And this very discussion has started in Brazil as well. So even though we don't have a provision in the Marco Civil on the right to be forgotten, we have already in the case law, in our cases that are being decided by the courts, a huge discussion on if a person asks Google to remove from google.com, but also from google.com.br, should a Brazilian judge grant this request for the removal to take place not only in the Brazilian search engine, but also in the international search engine. And it's really interesting to see how decisions in the Court of Appeals of the State of São Paulo are being split up. And I recall one decision from like I believe 1 month ago, that a judge was saying, I as a Brazilian judge don't feel comfortable to decide that this one content might be removed not only from Brazil, which is something that I can exercise my jurisdiction, but this content might be erased from Germany or Colombia, and the judge mentioned those two countries. And I think it's interesting because it shows that the discussion that you have in Europe is a discussion that is happening in the Brazilian courts, even though the standards might be different because we don't have this language that you have in the Italian declaration. And in this, just a personal note, I think the whole idea of the right to be forgotten is the idea that maybe it will be not the time for the Brazilian to legislate it as it is, especially because I believe the courts in Brazil right now, they are going through a moment in which free speech is crucial to take a higher stand, especially in the Supreme Court. And I'll just conclude here saying that, as you know, Brazil is going through a very difficult political moment, and the political turmoil in Brazil with the impeachments of the former presidents and a bunch of congressmen being involved with corruption scandals. And of course, we know that politicians might abuse from a right to be forgotten, especially if you don't have a strong language. So that's why I think it's important to make this comparison between Brazil and Italy.
Very, very good. And let me say something that is very important, especially for young people going at school and so on, that the right to be forgotten is a wrong title, because it is clear that the net don't forget about you, never. And then possibly you can convince or you can oblige the Google or even other search engines to forget the link. But if your enemies made a copy and then they publish what there is inside the network, then you don't have any legal provision that can protect you unless you succeed in asking a lawyer or so on to prosecute those that made the copy. But then you don't know who made the copy. So in practice, to be forgotten is something impossible. But so we have to define very well what are the protection that you can get. Simply not being searched with the engine.
Do we have any comments on questions from the audience on the right to be forgotten or issues of liability? Do we? Go ahead.
My name is Ingeneia. I'm also from Brazil, and I'm part of Youth IGF. And I think the right to be forgotten has a lot of relation with cyberbullying, because something that it might look really different, but something that we do not see now is that a lot of children who are involved in in cyberbullying and talking a lot about their personal lives or having a lot of issues with colleagues from school or something like that, in the future they might have a lot of problem with that, even to get jobs or something like that, because we are all exposed online in internet. So I think that even that we all understood that the Marco Civil da Internet is a general law, and we're trying to construct that in Brazil, and we cannot be too specific. I think it's really important to try to planning and to find next steps, because, for example, when we talk about making public policies that are going to make education and universal access to internet, it's really great to talk about it, but I think we might start to think how to make this effective. Because, for example, I was born in the rural country of São Luís in Maranhão, which if you live in Brazil, you probably know it's a very hard place to have access to internet and to other things. So people there, even that they do not have that much of access to internet, it's really important to try to make education when I talk education, I talk public schools, universities, and youth, to get involved with that, to understand how important it is to use internet as a technology of education, how important it is to understand how to put yourself online or internet. And I would like to ask about the next steps that you guys are thinking of, how Brazilian politics are, talking about it, make this really effective, and how we youth can help it. Because we have a lot of actions, like volunteer or groups who are trying to talk about that. All of us who are here with Youth IGF, we are here because we already worry about this issue. So I think it would be really important to try to get youth involved, to try to make this affection of the education, of really talking about that and make this real by taking these small actions and give them more power and empower people to really become part of this change. So, thank you.
Do you have any other? Okay, so let's get three questions. So you're in the back.
Louise Bennett from the BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT in the UK. We've did a lot of work trying to persuade the EU to change the wording of many things in the General Data Protection Regulation, including the right to be forgotten, because it is open. If you choose the wrong words and you don't define your what you're saying very accurately, you will have enormous numbers of legal challenges, as you have already been talking about. The right to be forgotten should have been, in our opinion, written as the right to request delisting, which is all that you can actually do, and what came out of the case law for Google. And if you say the right to be forgotten, you're going to have many, many challenges, because it is actually impossible. And if you'd said the right to be delisted, then it would have been quite clear that it was a specific and limiting thing that was possible and was reasonable. And I think one of the big problems with much of the legislation in these areas, and it sounds as if you've had it with your two Bills of Rights, is the question of not defining your terms properly and not saying things that are actually possible to do.
My name is Pedro from Brazil. I'd like to make two requests, and if I can't have both, you can pick whichever one you prefer to answer. The first is I'd like to hear a full argument on against the inconstitutionality of the Article 19 that's usually alleged in Brazil concerning consumer legislation. I would like to hear more from you about that. How do you answer that issue? And the other one is, if you understand the judicial notice and takedown system that has been implemented through Marco Civil as means of furthering and strengthening a notion of digital due process when you take the decision of choosing whether the content stays on or off from a private party to a judge?
Okay, so thanks for that. Thanks for those 3 questions. So it's my pleasure to inform you that we are going to stay here for the next 3 hours in order to respond properly those questions. But thanks. I think great questions that put us in a good opportunity to tackle a lot of topics. Stefano, you want to begin? Do you want to begin with the other questions, or?
No, just okay. So concerning the intervention of the lady there, what's your name? Luis. Okay. I fully agree, and you have been much more precise than I did. But the words are very important. And but they connect to also legal difficulties in correcting the things that should be addressed. And also another point that is discussed a lot even in Italy is about generally speaking the privacy. Because privacy is something that is not only connected to the search engines, but the net knows a lot of any one of us, and we don't know what the network already knows. So we can go around and search about this difficulty in protecting the rights of the single persons in the network. And when we consider all the provisions anti-terrorism, and then we have the preoccupation of the users to be spied, and he don't know. So this is and then if we consider the law enforcement agencies, some transparency might be obliged or requested. But when we go with the intelligence, what can we do? And of course, these are areas where the difficulty to protect the single individuals legally is something very, very difficult even to explain with appropriate words. I insist always with the word transparency, but transparency is not feasible 100%. Okay. I wanted to make this comment. For the rest, I fully agree, and I don't know about the question concerning specifically Article 19.
We'll get there.
Okay, you can answer.
Thanks, Stefano. Just one quick comment on the right to be forgotten. I couldn't agree most. Couldn't agree more that the right to be forgotten is a tricky name because, like, no judicial order could make you forget something. Like, to forget is the result of something else. So what we're talking about is a lawsuit that will request a removal or a delisting, but it could never request someone to forget something. Like, the judge is not a man, doesn't have like a man in black device that will put in front of your face and then suddenly you will forget what you have seen before. So definitely we're talking about the listing and definitely not forgotten. And the question regarding how youth could have engaged in the discussions of the Marco Civil, and since we're talking about the right to be forgotten and cyberbullying, first of all, let me thank the presence of the guys and girls from the youth IGF here. Like, it's so good to see you all together coming down to a discussion about the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights and the comparison with with the Italian experience, since, as I would imagine, most of you are from Brazil. I think it's really good to have this conversation going with our foreign friends and to help to bridge the conversation between different countries. Specifically on Right to be Forgotten and youth engagement, the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights is not an abstract law in the sense that it doesn't connect to the way that you end up living your life online. So when we're talking about privacy, we're talking about your daily activities on the internet. When we're talking about net neutrality, we're talking about the future of the internet that you are going to use in the next 10 years or such. When we're talking about how to come up with a system of intermediary liability, we are trying to design a way in which free speech is a value that is enshrined and enforced in Brazil, and of course in the Brazilian internet through judicial decisions. So I believe you have lots of areas in which the youth could have a good impact on the way that the Marco Civil is moving forward. I would say, I'm not sure if all of you are studying law, so I would definitely avoid the legalish terms here, but I think it's important to mention that because it's a law, it's not exclusively to lawyers and people trained in law to understand and to provide feedbacks on how this law is going to be received by society, how it's going to affect business models, how it's going to change the way in which technology is offered and presented in a number of applications in Brazil. I know that it's very obvious, but I would like to resort to this idea of Lessig, of the law of the horse, that we have four forces that is really competing among themselves to decide who is going to decide how you do what you do. So one of them is law, which is the choice between something is legal or illegal. The other one is the market or economic forces that will tell you that you're going to do something because it's going to cost you less or more. The other force is the society, which is you're going to do this because it's accepted by society or not that much accepted. And finally, technology that could make easier or harder for you to do something. So I think it's a good image that puts law on its place as a result in this 1/4 of the diagram. And just to conclude very quickly on Pedro has very tough questions on the interpretation and enforcement of the Marco Civil. You said I could choose. So I'll try very briefly to address the two of them. So first of all, is the Article 19 unconstitutional? I really don't think so. Article 19 comes up with a system for liability of intermediaries. It's not a article on removal of content, and if people end up arguing that it's not the system that the Consumer Protection Code has established back then in the 90s, I think you can come up with a solution that the Marco Civil is a specific law concerning internet, and it balances different rights and come up with a regime that is not new in Brazil. If you look on how data brokers might be held liable for, and I'm sorry if I'm mistranslating this from Portuguese to English, but when you are in debt with some store and then your name is sent out to a data broker, the way in which this data broker can be responsible for wrongly claiming that the name of this one person is the name of a debtor or someone who is not paying their debts is the very same way in which the Marco Civil is treating the liability of internet applications. So that I don't think it's unconstitutional, that's for sure. And then you're talking about digital due process. I believe there's a huge area to work on, because if one on one hand, the Marco Civil does not require a judicial order for a content to be removed, of course. That leaves some space for companies and providers to create their own terms of services and agreements in which content might be removed from the internet, and that's where we need transparency, and that's where we need that the community guidelines are transparent and applied as they are written there. But I believe that there's a huge area to work on digital due process, and it's important not to look on half of the coin or half of the glass here, thinking that if we have Article 19, all problems are solved. Quite the opposite. We need to look on digital due process on the contents that are being removed, if they are or not compliant with the rules that providers themselves have stated that they are going to follow. But this is just very quick comments.
Can I launch a last idea?
Go ahead.
Okay. I want to launch a last idea that is a proposal of something that is discussed in this period about the social networks, Facebook in particular, but not only. And that was connected also to some idea that came on in United States during the campaign of the last elections. Some that is connected from one side to hate speech, and then to the source of the information. So Facebook is studying, under pressure of some government, algorithm in order to verify if certain information that are spread in the network, especially in social networks, are false or not. And you can imagine the difficulty to do it with an algorithm and then to judge if this search is going always in the right direction. But this is a real preoccupation because talking about democracy, e-democracy, democracy at the time of the internet, there should be some help for the users not to confuse any false information with the right information. And this is something that it will come and will be some argument in order to verify, because the conflict with possible legal problems are already there. And then maybe there should be some human help in order to verify if the algorithm made the right choice. But this is something very, very important, and this a right, because the normal internet user is confused, because you find, if you search some information, such an enormous amount of information that then and help how to select the information that is not so wrong is an important right.
Flavia, you want to have some final remarks before we close?
I just like to highlight because the question of the representative of China, the relationship between digital inclusion and net neutrality, and how is important this concept became clear when we analyze practices like zero rating planes, data cap planes with blocks in the end of the volumes of data. And in Brazil now, Anatel, that is the national agency in telecommunication, and CGI and the courts are working over this discussion to reach the better interpretation with the focus in digital inclusion. Net neutrality has a relationship, directly relationship with inclusion, digital inclusion and universalization. And this is very important for us, for the civil society in Brazil now.
So thanks to Flavia, Mario, and Stefano for putting up this discussion, doing some comparison between the two texts, and going through some of the new topics that are emerging. Just to let you know, we could go over doing comparison on a lot of other topics, such as the Italian Declaration has a protection of anonymity, which is something that is quite different from what we had in Brazil, net neutrality, and so on. But thanks for attending this conversation. I hope it was informative, and our panelists will be here right after the panel to discuss with you any further questions and comments that you might have. I would like to send a shout out to Carlos Afonso, who is not me, but is a counselor from the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee, who is watching us from the streaming right now and has been putting all sorts of comments here in the live tweets of this panel. So Carlos Afonso, you're supposed to be here, but I'm glad that you watched us through the streaming. And guys, thanks for attending, and let's keep on with this conversation during this IGF. So see you in the next workshop or panel. Okay, so see you all. Bye bye.